welcome to the program. I'm Chris Stafford, and my guest today is Megan Harrod, who's the Alpine press officer at US Ski and Snowboard. Megan is heading into her fourth season with the organization as they approach an Olympic year. It's a world in which the landscape is shifting for press officers and communications these days with the advancements in social media. So I thought it would be an interesting conversation with Megan, who does approach her job with personality and the passion that makes her very popular on the circuit. And she keeps up with social media trends by addressing the long and short format of meeting the needs of the different audiences to which she has to convey not just the results, but the human interest stories behind the news. Megan, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's great to be here.
Well, here you are in Park City, Utah, obviously a home of skiing and a ski fan, former coach yourself in the sport, doing, I think, what many ski fans will say must be a dream job, to be following USSA and the Alpine skiers around the world, especially once the World Cup season starts. It's off-season now, so what does the press officer do when it's off-season?
Yeah, it's funny, Chris. Yes, a lot of people think that the work kind of stops, but this season in particular, first of all, I'm full-time. I've worked this into a full-time role. It started as a contract role when I started with US Ski and Snowboard 3 years ago. And this year in particular, obviously, it being an Olympic year, it's quite busy in terms of planning on long lead media and PR, and so we've got USOC Media Summit coming up. We just did the West Hollywood NBC USOC shoot, and we just want to generate interest and awareness of what the athletes are doing in the summer months too, because I think it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. And when the athletes also believe this, that when they are not on the snow, they feel like the fans don't think they're working, and they are working hard every day in and out of the gym. And I spend a good amount of time in Park City in the summer, which is nice because a lot of the athletes come through. And right now in particular, many of the athletes across teams, men's, women's, speed and tech, and across levels, A, B, C, B, and national training group are currently training together at the gym, which just makes for a really cool environment.
Well, obviously, yes, you never have any real downtime, but you mentioned there's some cross-training as well. Alice McInnes, I see, was doing some speed skating. So it's not just in the gym. What else do they get up to in the summer?
It's pretty cool. Actually, Eirik, their strength and conditioning coach, his name is Eirik Hollowell, and he comes from Norway. He does a really good job of getting that crew to do some crossover training, and we had a little bit of a partnership with US speed skating, and that entailed the women's speed team going and hanging out with members of US speed skating. For the last couple of weeks, they've gone fairly consistently, and they worked with this former Chinese Olympian short track speed skater and numerous coaches that are involved in the organization, as well as Mitch Whitmore and Sugar Todd, two of the athletes. And it was four of our girls, Stacy Cook, Alice McInnes, Breezy Johnson, and Alice Merriweather, who was the downhill 2017 downhill junior champion this last year. And they had fun doing it. I think that a lot of the movement patterns cross over well, but also it's just about getting them out of the gym and into another element to mix up training. And I think that they do a really good job of it. Also, that said, the men's strength and conditioning coach Josh Applegate came to check it out. He and Parker Gray, who's an assistant coach for the men's tech team, and they're going to try to get some of the guys out there as well, men's speed and GS skiers, to speed skating to the Oval, which is an unbelievable venue. If you've never been, it's just it's pretty impressive in there and inspiring.
Well, obviously, lots of opportunities for the athletes to keep fit. I mean, obviously, they have to already prepare months ahead for the next season. But I want to talk about your role, Megan, in the sport, because press officers now have seen a shifting landscape when it comes to the role of communications, whether you're on the circuit or not on the circuit. The mediums have changed. There's what I call the long and the short format of being a press officer, you know, in terms of the sound bites, the social media aspect, the short format. But you also produce what I find, anyway, and I'm sure many people, because you keep doing it, also find helpful in terms of media connection, media stories, and so on. But also, you tell through your notes, your roundup, and you sent us one recently about what's happening out of the season. This is clearly a long format, and I'm just interested in the feedback you get from this and how you balance the long and the short format of communications now to meet those different audiences.
Yeah, as you say, definitely a changing format. We've talked a lot about this recently, especially with the introduction of our new chief our chief marketing officer, Dan Barnett, who comes in post Mike Jakewit, who did a great job with broadcast and getting more hours for us and our sports on TV. But Dan has a big focus in digital, and I think this is great. And the role of press officer is changing quite a bit. I mean, gone are the days where, I mean, we even now are changing with how we record audio post race. You can upload it right away, and people have access to it so much faster than they ever did. There's a lot of discussion about rights and videoing from the finish, the restricted areas, and what that means for our rights holders. And I think that we're coming to a point where we need to figure out, and we finally are figuring out, maybe how to utilize social media in a way that will pump up the viewership numbers on TV and guide our fans to the TV to watch the full broadcast. But it has been a bit of a challenge because we have, and I say that, I mean, I'm speaking specifically from, we're in a time right now, and I feel completely honored to be involved right now because I get to work with two of the best female athletes in the world. And one of them, Lindsey Vonn, is one of the most well-known across sports. And then Michaela Schifrin, who's young and just seemingly unstoppable no matter what she gets involved with. It's really an honor, but it's also, we need to figure out ways in order to work with these athletes in order to get the story out, because they are very marketable. And Lindsey is, I tell people this all the time, she is one of the best and most savvy marketers I've ever met. Not only is she one of the, fiercest and most competitive and most inspiring female athletes, but she's figured it out. And so last year we were sitting in Solden, kicking off the World Cup season, and we were talking with the EBU, a broadcast rights holder, about restrictions for our athletes and sharing media from restricted areas. And I just, I raised my hand, and I wrote a story about this because it's still very much a male-dominated world, this industry. And I raised my hand for a good, 5 minutes, and two men were called on before me, and then I just was patient. And I'm, meanwhile, probably one of the youngest individuals in the room with a digital media background. And finally, I was called on, and I said, I think we need to figure out, there are a lot of gray areas with these restrictions. And I think, speaking of specifically from the U.S. ski team, we have the arguably most marketable athlete in the sport. And it's not really, there's no arguing about it. She is, and Lindsey is, and we can utilize that. So that said, a lot of what we do now is also message management. So helping the athletes to craft a message that they want to get across, and that we as an organization, as US Ski and Snowboard, would like to get across as well on any given race weekend, and guiding them in that way, and really utilizing social media to get the message across, because a lot of these athletes have more followers than the organization itself. And it's always going to be that way because they're stars, right? And so that is something that I've tried to also balance still with the long form. And the World Cup notes that I write every race day, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time and effort, but I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. And I think that that's not going to go away. The long form is not going to go away. It's just a matter of figuring out how to find a good balance with both of them. And so I would like to do things with integrating video and audio more so into my World Cup notes. And I think post-race, you'll find a lot more from US Ski and Snowboard anyway. The direction we're going is more highlight reels for social media, and then a small web story that leads to a highlight reel of the day, because really that's how people are consuming information these days. So I'm very much looking forward to a new era, and especially with Dan Barnett as our CMO, I think it'll be really good to kind of get into this more digital landscape.
I want to talk about specifically that, how you decide which is going to go on which social media platform when you're right in the season, in everything is just so fast paced and you're out on location. Megan, but let's just give us an overview of what your season looks like. As you mentioned, Solden is the kickoff to the World Cup season in Austria in October, late October. Once you get on that, I mean, just give us an idea, once you're on the circus and you're traveling, what your day in the life of looks like for Megan Harrod.
Yeah, so the season kicks off, the competition season kicks off in October, at the end of October. But before that, I actually will go to Portillo. I try to do one early prep period camp with the athletes and generate some good content to go into the kickoff. So I'll go to Portillo this year, and then we have our copper camps in November post kickoff, and then kind of have some of the domestic stuff, which is really big for us. Obviously, Killington, we're going back there again this year, and hopefully everything, Mother Nature will cooperate, and we'll have Birds of Prey. Again, it just didn't feel right last year to not start the season with that race. But basically, after the domestic races, once we are full into the European tour, I'm over in Europe from early December through March, and it'll look different, obviously, this year with the Olympic year. But it's like full on. I mean, I go to Europe, I pick up my car, and then I'm the only one traveling between the men and the women's tours, aside from our Alpine director, Patrick Rimmel. So I'm kind of on a different schedule from everyone that I'm hanging out with, which is great because in a sense it allows me to come into these environments with a completely fresh kind of perspective. And I think the athletes like a little bit too, because it mixes up the team environment and creates a new level of energy. But if it's a speed week, I'll generally get there on a Tuesday or Monday night, and then we have our training runs. And those days in the afternoons, there will be either one-on-one interviews with TV, print, radio that we've set up ahead of time for athletes, or whether it's them coming to us or coming to me or me pitching it to them. And then when it hits like race day, it's the night before I prep for my World Cup notes. I look up a lot of statistics and kind of what athletes have done well at the venue previously, who to look out for in the race, kind of little small anecdotes about our team and what's going on behind the scenes. Now that's a balance too, Chris, because I'm mindful of not giving up too much information. There's a lot that I know that I won't share. And that is really important to me as a press officer. It's athletes first is my motto. And I I want to gain their trust, and I need to gain their trust in order to do my job effectively. And so I'll share small anecdotes that, people love to hear and feel like they're involved. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it's this little like window into a world that is aspirational that they wish they could be in too, and trying to kind of set the mood. And so they can understand that even if they're not at the race, they could still sort of feel what it feels like to be there. So race day morning, I wake up early, like 5, and I'll go to the hill, and I do a lot of things that are like not press officer related too. So I'll go to the hill, I'll check in at the press center typically, and then I'll go out and I inspect. Every race day I inspect with the athletes. It's important for me to feel the conditions, to say hi to the coaches in the morning. It's like, it's just establishes the day and helps me to be able to talk to journalists later if they have questions about course conditions or tricky sections of the course. And then I go into the press center and finish my notes based on what I saw and felt. And then we go out and I go into the finish area, and that's kind of my zone. And it's really interesting because I'm the first one that athletes see when they get down off the course, and it either can be really good or really bad, and it's completely dynamic. Like, you just have to feel out a situation, and if the athlete doesn't want to talk to anyone, then it's about protecting them in that regard. And if they do, and it's just a really dynamic situation. It's hard to get used to that initially. It was the hardest thing for me in my first year, was to really like feel out what each of them needs to hear or not hear when they get down, and then how to create a game plan from there. And it's obviously different for athletes outside of, Lindsay, Michaela, Ted, Steven Nyman, sort of. And it's a hard balance to find. And I know now in general, I know how to deal with each of the athletes and service them in a way that they need to be serviced. So after the race, it depends on if we've medaled or not. And if we have, it's really busy. And if we haven't, it's not as busy. And if something bad happens, it's really busy for me too. So I'll just use an example. Crown Montana last year, I decided to take a week away from the circuit for the first time since I started with U.S. Ski and Snowboard. And I went to Japan early before Korea, before our test event there. And it just so happened that the course conditions were a little bit sketchy, and 3 of our girls decided not to start. And me not being there made it very difficult to try to figure out how to create a game plan to move forward from afar. And that day was really busy, even if we, didn't have any medals. So yeah, it's a really dynamic role, and we just kind of have to think on the fly, and I try to keep the mood light most of the time. So,
well, clearly one of the most key points and parts of your job is that relationship, that trust, as you say, with the athletes, of knowing how much to share with the public, but to give them an insight, to make it interesting, because, as you say, the public likes to know what's happening behind the scenes, especially when they're across the world. And that relationship is key. As you said, the elite athletes, like Lindsay and like Michaela, they tell the story for you. I'm wondering how you balance their profile with the profile of the up-and-coming skiers who just getting better and better and deserve the airtime and column inches with their success when maybe those other 2 races didn't have a good day.
Yeah, I think from the beginning, one of my focus points has been to figure out a way how to highlight the up-and-comers, as you say, or rising stars, and even those athletes that might fall just outside of that kind of that focal point for the rest of the media. So they have interesting stories, And I've really made an effort to humanize the athletes and create more raw and authentic content that people out there from a fan perspective can relate to. So the thing with a lot of the outlier athletes, like the really like superstar athletes, is that a lot of kids at the club level, I feel like they can't relate to that as much. It seems like it's aspirational, it's amazing, and they love to hear about them. But maybe it would be better to tell a story of a different athlete that might have skied for their club when they were younger, and maybe have a more realistic path to the U.S. ski team. And so I created this concept called What Makes a Champ. And it was a content series. It is a content series that highlights athletes outside of the top 5, let's say. And the whole goal there was because ESPN and the New York Times and everyone will write about Michaela, Lindsay, Ted, etc. But I felt like we could utilize our mediums to help the athletes who really need it. And so that's what we started to do, and it's been pretty successful, and that content has been received very well. And it's also something that we found that we can use as like a bridge when athletes retire from the U.S. ski team. And so for Will Brandenburg and Leanne Smith and Anna Marno, who are a few of the athletes who more recently retired, we were able to feature them in a different way that kind of helped them to thank their sponsors, the people who were involved with their careers, and sent them out on a high note. And that's really important to me because I don't just work for the top few star athletes, and those individuals do have larger teams. You know, the top 5 athletes have agents. Some of them have publicists. There are multiple individuals involved, which doesn't always necessarily make it more simple. The layers are more complex, and the relationships I have with their teams are very good, and I'm thankful for that. But I can, in a sense, act as an agent for the other athletes, or a publicist, if you will. And I think that is where I can provide a lot, and have provided a lot of value to them, and become a little bit of an advisor. And that's kind of turned into a personal relationships with many of them. I mean, Razy Stiegler is one of my best friends, and it's, you know, there's a fine line there too. But if you can find that level of respect, that level of mutual respect, then it's not a problem. And so I have really enjoyed helping individuals like Loren Ross, who is one of the she's one of the strongest female athletes on the team, and she's super dynamic, and like trying to work with her to find other ways to share her story, because she's an artist, a true artist, off the hill and on the hill. And then Stacy Cook, who is an incredible role model for, you know, young women, and has her Chicks on Sticks camps at Mammoth, and like Alice McKennis and Leanne Smith, who did help with the inaugural American Downhiller camp in Mammoth that Marco Sullivan started this year. And I think there are a lot of, and Julia Mancuso. I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, she's our most decorated female athlete at big events. And I think she's going to be a little bit of a dark horse this year because of her injury. And I think that a lot of young women can aspire to like her personality and her brand, which is really strong. And this whole Super Jewels thing, and it's awesome. And so, yeah, there are definitely stories to tell of the younger up and comers, and those that aren't even young but might fall right outside of that top tier.
Well, clearly, that you obviously say that's your job to find those other human interest stories as well, to bring the others in front of the limelight. Now, you mentioned there your relationship as a press officer with agents and publicists, being the first one at the bottom of the hill there to talk to the athletes. What's your relationship like then, getting that information from the athlete right after the race, the post-race interview, as we call it, and to the publicist and the agent? How does that line of communication work for you?
Yeah, it's different for, let's, for instance, use three athletes who, as an example, Lindsey Vonn, Michaela Schifrin, and Ted Ligety. So Ted was out much of the season last year with injury, but he has an agent and she's not on ground. So she and I will interact a lot prior to the race for anything that needs to be strategized or set up before race weekend. If I'm on the ground with him, we work together. And with Lindsey and Michaela, they each have individuals in the finish area as well, which is definitely necessary, especially now that Michaela's kind of going into the speed realm. Speed races, then on a speed weekend, you'll have, last year we had Julia, Michaela, Lindsey, Loren. Like, it's really important to have extra hands there. And so Lindsey has an individual who used to ski race for Italy named Enrica Cipriani, and she's in the finish area. And she works with Lindsey's publicist and agent team back home from afar. So she and we work really well together in that zone, and I'll kind of strategize with her which entities to hit and which we can bypass, and based on priority that day. And then we'll also get messages or audio that we need to send back home to domestic journalists. So, which is really important that we don't forget that or neglect them, because especially in this season, this Olympic year, we have a lot more interest and we need to capitalize on that. So I send audio back to about 30 to 40 domestic American journalists as well. And then with Michaela, her agent, Killian Albrecht, who's a former ski racer for Austria, then defected to Bulgaria and skied for them. He and I have our finish area flow dialed. I mean, we've worked together now 3 seasons, and he and I have a great working relationship, and it's based on a strong foundation of trust, and we know. And there is a little bit of back and forth and negotiation, and sometimes the athletes, in the tech race don't want to talk to the media after the first run. And we try to feel it out and figure out, take care of the Associated Press, because they hit the wire and go everywhere, and take care of our NBC contacts. And so it's funny, because after my first season, I said to my boss, Tom Kelly, who's the VP of Communications at US Ski and Snowboard, I said to him, I don't think I'm a very good negotiator. It's something that I think I need to work on. And he said, Megan, I think you're selling yourself short. You negotiate in your job every single day. And it's true. It's people dynamics and negotiation. So really fluid relationship with those individuals in the finish area. But, oftentimes, Chris, I'll just look at the athletes when they come through and I'll say, hey, do you feel up if it hasn't been their day, I'll ask them, do you feel up for talking to the AP, or are you not feeling up for it? And then we kind of create a game plan from there.
It is, as you say, dynamic. It's on the fly. You have to think on your feet too. And I want to come back to the social media feeds, because each of those services a different audience, as we said earlier, Megan. How do you, when you're on the ground there at the end of a race, how do you choose the priorities for your social media feeds versus the press release versus your notes, and obviously then the audio and video demands that are there?
Yeah, I certainly am not a one-woman team. I have there are a couple people that are on my team that are back stateside that help with race day recaps. So our press releases. Our Tom Kelly has been pretty vocal in that and adamant that he doesn't want press officers to be writing game day recaps because it's just too hard to divide focus when you're meant to be with the athlete to service them. And especially now with as much as we podium, it's really important to go with the flow with the athlete. So we do all the media in the finish area, and then we have the victory press conference, and then after that we might have phone interviews lined up with domestic media. And so there's a team back stateside of 2 individuals, and one will write the recap. And on any given day, there are 2 races going on, obviously, men's and women's. So one will cover men's and one will cover women's. I feed them notes and quotes and information that they need in order to write accurately about the day. And then historically, that story has been posted to our U.S. Ski Team Facebook page. And then later in the day, we'll also, which is early in the morning for stateside, is we'll also have a highlight run that we're able to post if we podiumed, which is awesome. And then I manage myself Instagram, and then Twitter. We've done some live tweeting, and we've done less of that lately because we found that the following likes it, but not many people are up at that time to engage with it. So a lot of our focus has been placed on Instagram, especially now, and we did a little bit of Snapchat, but now with Instagram stories, we're kind of diverting our attention away from Snapchat and towards Instagram because that's where the younger generation is. In fact, when we look at our numbers for Facebook, it's like 40 to 55-year-old men that are typically engaging with our posts. So it's a completely different demographic, and it's really important that we're able to meet that younger demographic via Instagram, and they love it. They love, our story numbers have gotten so much higher throughout the season. They love being able to see the behind the scenes. It's really important for us to be able to share that and, push the limits a little bit with capturing content from areas like up in before the athletes are ready to race. It's kind of fun to capture them in team hospitality and ask them how they're doing, and they're open to it too. It gives them really good exposure, and that's where a lot of the athletes are focusing on more so now too, less on Twitter and Facebook, and those are kind of tools that just need to be kept up and figured out how to, what to share via them, like longer form video. When I say longer, I mean like no more than 3 minutes, but like things like that, like little edits that people can engage with. But Instagram is really where a lot of the focus has been.
From the top of the hill, I love those little insights, final preparation before they race. So I can see why, that is the attraction. The short form, as you mentioned, of the videos too, and it's that live interaction, but there's also a level of expectation now with the audience, isn't there? As you say, the younger audience wants that, the older audience wants to read something more leisurely, so it is a fine balance. But from what you've learned of this changing landscape that we've talked about, Megan, where do you see that going, say, coming into an Olympic year, another World Cup season always, but where do you see those trends moving toward now to make me shift your focus a little bit, or in any way make it easier for you?
Yeah, no, totally. Good question, because we just talked about this last week in our planning meetings. I think what we're doing, with the rebrand of U.S. Ski and Snowboard, there's been some significant changes that affect U.S. Ski Team, and I think positively, because we're able to tap and draw on a larger audience now. So for Facebook, we've combined all of our accounts into one. So we no longer have historically, U.S. ski team has meant U.S. Alpine ski team. So a lot of the individuals, so we have the largest following in that realm. Now we've combined everything for Facebook into one account. So we are innately, because of this change, going to have to figure out what we share and how we share it on that page without inundating individuals and also, diluting the message, because I think there are a lot of people who expect something when they come to a page, and now they're going to see more, which is awesome. It's an opportunity for us to share more information about our other sports. Though I'm not kidding anyone, it might affect Alpine a little bit, So then, from an Instagram standpoint, we've kept U.S. ski team, and now we're integrating Nordic as well as freestyle with Alpine into our account. Free ski and snowboard still have separate Instagram accounts. So just with the nature of the rebranding and these changes, we're finding how to adapt to that and what kind of content to serve up. Still, Alpine-related content in those mediums gets more engagement because the audience is a larger Alpine. Most of the individuals are Alpine-focused. So what I think we're going to end up doing this year is, like I said, a lot more digital highlight reels. So we're talking about keeping the flow going from race day with social from an Instagram perspective. If it's Kitzbühel, the focus that day will be on Kitzbühel, and it will be on Alpine because it's the largest event in the sport, or in this sport. If it's a day where freestyle has a big event, then it's going to be, the focus is going to be on freestyle, and they're going to do behind the scenes and Instagram stories from that. Then the race day recaps are they're going to change. They're not going to be as lengthy. They're not going to be as creative. They're going to be more factual and bullet pointed on highlights of the day. So journalists are still able to pull what they need to from that if they need to, but it's going to be more video focused for our fan base. So we will post highlight reels of the day and a small web story with quick factual bullet points. And that's where less of our time is going to be spent writing these long form stories with, that infused creativity and, unique headlines and clever headlines, because this is not the direction that the landscape of media is going right now. So that's kind of what we're working through right now, and how that actually plays out, we'll see. We're having a content strategy discussion next week, so we can really nail that down.
It's rather like the changing conditions with the weather on the hill, isn't it? You just got to keep moving with the flow there, Megan.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, and hopefully get ahead of it rather than be reactive to it. So I think that, we have a big opportunity to do so now, especially, like I said, with Dan coming from America's Cup and having done some pretty innovative things for that niche sport. And we can kind of learn from that and draw from that. He's a Brit himself as well. So.
Well, there you go. He must have something going for him then.
Sure, I think so.
Now, we of course cater here at With Sports to women doing all kinds of things in sports, and not least of all the jobs behind the scenes, rather like yours. So finally, Megan, what would you say to anyone that's listening to this thinking, being a press officer might be a fun gig, that could be a career I'd like to head into? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think I quite often have informational interviews with young journalists, students who are soon graduating, and I tell them it appears glamorous from the outside. It is. I love my job because I love this sport, and I'm entirely passionate about the sport and the humans involved. And I think, having grown up in it and having some of my best friends from childhood still in my life is a community that is unmatched. And I think that if you can find that a way to bridge, passion and career and have them merge together into one, it's an ideal situation. And Gary Black from ski racing, who recently passed away, would say that he never worked a day in his life because he was working in this sport, and it doesn't feel like work. That said, the days are long, and I think a lot of people, don't understand. They don't see what I do and don't understand. It's a lot. It is behind the scenes, and I'll be in my hotel room working until 2 a.m. and then waking up at 5 a.m. and I don't sleep much, and I travel by myself, and it gets lonely, and those sides of it aren't glamorous, but it's all part of it. And it makes things like spending Christmas, maybe not with your family, but with your ski family, around a fire in Patch, Austria, in a little village called Patch, Austria. It makes those things special, sharing glühwein and having, lighting sparklers and gift exchanging, and it's a really unique thing. And yeah, I totally encourage younger individuals, especially women, to get into this sport, because I think it's also a changing landscape, and it is becoming less male dominated, and I think that that's a good thing. And I'll say one more thing is I try to bring an energy to the hill that they don't experience normally, and I think that the infusion of the female into that environment makes a difference in that regard. And I smile and I wave and I say hi to everyone. And I had one of the kind of stern Austrian FIS guys tell me last year that he's like, I just have to tell you, it's like always, the sun is always shining when you're around, even if it's not shining outside, literally. And I think my boss, he told me women like you are changing the vibe and the environment in the Finnish area, and that's enabling the sport to move forward in a different way. And I couldn't get any more positive feedback than that, because that's what I hope that I can help to affect change in that regard and get more women involved in the sport.
Well, it is all about your passion and personality, Megan, and you clearly have both of those aplenty and doing a great job. We really love reading your World Cup notes and following you on social media. So the best of luck in this Olympic year for the team as well, of course, and for you in your career. Keep enjoying being a press officer for USSA, and keep the stories coming, Megan.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time today.
You bet. And thanks for taking the time to come on the program. It's been fun.
Of course.
And for ski fans, we hope to be bringing you more World Cup news as the season unfolds, heading up to those Olympic Games in Pyeongchang in February of 2018. If you're listening to this podcast through your iTunes feed, you can also find the show notes to every episode on our website at wispsports.com, where you'll also find more conversations from around the world of women's sports. You can also join in those conversations by following us on social media. Just look for Wisp Sports on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you'd like to reach us here, you can email info@wispsports.com. We always love to hear from you if you have any comments, questions or suggestions about our programming here at Wisp Sports. So until the next time, thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.